Okay, well, hi everyone. I'm Ikra. I'm the new coordinator for the Harvard and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center site for the New England Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. Now, I just want to review a few housekeeping items before we begin. Participant microphones will be muted on entry. If you have any questions during the event, please use the chat. This session is being recorded and it will be emailed to all the participants once available. If you have any questions after this session, please email newengland@mhttcnetwork.org. At the end of the month, we will send you a certificate of completion that you can submit to your particular board for continuing education credit. Please contact Fisher at c4innovates.com for more information on CE after the event. This slide provides a description for our disclaimers for MHTTC. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. That language is strengths-based and hopeful, inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, healing-centered and trauma-responsive, inviting to individuals participating in their own journeys, person-first and free of labels, non-judgmental and avoiding assumptions, respectful, clear, and understandable, consistent with our actions, policies, and products. With that, it is my pleasure to hand it over to Kelsey for introductions.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for introducing yourself in the chat. It's great to see we have some folks from our Massachusetts network here and also outside of it. I always love to see the kind of breadth of folks who can join us. So I'm here to introduce Abby. Abby Duke is a longtime peer specialist in New York State and the recovery specialist and trainer supervisor at the On Track New York initiative at the Center for Psychiatric Innovations. So Abby brings a decade of experience working on a peer specialist to a variety of settings throughout New York State, as well as in training and technical assistance work for the New York State Office of Mental Health and for On Track New York. And specifically over the past year, we've had the pleasure of working with Abby and her team as far as leading a peer cohort for us in Massachusetts here. I think we've learned a lot about how to really support peer specialists in this role that I think for a lot of places is fairly new, and how to really be integrating those onto these recovery-oriented and really supportive coordinated teams for early intervention in psychosis. So that's what we're here to talk about today, to get more information about how to really not just have a peer specialist on a team, but integrate them as part of the whole treatment for early psychosis. So Abby, I'll hand it off to you, but also to everyone, please, I think this is especially an interactive call. We want to hear from you. So please feel free to speak up. But yeah, thanks. Take it away, Abby.
Excellent. Good morning, all. I'm very excited to be here and talk about my favorite thing, which is peer specialists. So I see some people introducing themselves in the chat box. That is so helpful. I love to know who's in the room, what roles we hold, where we're sitting. And as Kelsey mentioned, we are hoping for a lot of interactivity today. So if you are coming here hoping to sort of sit back and listen and learn, sorry, we want to hear from you too. And those of you who have joined us in peer specialist calls know that all of our voices are so much nicer than any one of our voices. So we really look forward to having some community dialogue in here. So I've done a tiny bit of an intro thanks to Kelsey. I'll just share a bit. So I do work for the On Track New York initiative at the Center for Practice Innovations, and that is the approach to peer specialist work that we're going to be talking about, which is the one that is within the On Track New York model, and that is currently happening in 30 teams, almost over 30 teams throughout New York State. We're going to spend some time this morning. I will take you through our website and show off our different resources for peer specialists because those are publicly available to anyone who's interested. If you have the internet, you can access our resources. And while they were developed specifically for peer specialists in On Track New York and therefore coordinated specialty care, there's a lot of stuff that's really helpful for peer specialists in other roles. but we do want to like highlight and shout out that these are for peer specialists in coordinated specialty care, because we don't necessarily get enough people talking about the work that we do here, and we're excited for this opportunity to amplify them and share them a little bit. So as you are introducing yourself in the chat box, it's great to hear your name, your role, where you're coming from. I'm also curious to hear, and feel free to use the chat box or just raise hand, if anyone brought questions today that you were hoping to have answered by the time we leave, because then we can make sure to take some time and dialogue on them. We will be ending with a Q&A, but it's great to know from the beginning what people are looking to learn, what elements of integrating peer specialists into coordinated specialty care feel most important to you. So I'm going to take a moment and a breath and a sip and let y'all hit the chat box or raise your hand to share the questions you'd like answered. Lauren, come on up.
Hi, Abby. Nice to meet you. I used to be a team leader with On Track New York up in Albany, the Parsons site. So I think very highly of your guys' program. I was hoping that you might speak today to having peers attend the weekly rounds or team meetings, and how you think about the amount of maybe clinical information or that's discussed among the clinical team, and how to kind of balance that with some of the principles of peer work.
Most excellent question. Thank you so much. And we love having On Track New York in the room. Okay, any other questions? I also see in the chat box, we've got Jacob looking forward to anything ACT specific. So welcome in the room. I'm always glad to have some ACT teams in the room. I will share that part of my work experience was as a peer specialist on an assertive community treatment team in New York State. And so while, again, we are going to be really focusing in on coordinated specialty care and the On Track New York model, it is an interdisciplinary team working with people who are working with people out in the community, out living their lives, or people who have maybe received mental health diagnoses that are considered to be under the umbrella term of like, what is SMI? I think there's a lot of similarities between our two teams. So I think that there'll be a lot of benefits for those who are ACT providers or interested in learning more about ACT care, but just really remembering that coordinated specialty care is a model that was specifically designed for young people between the ages of 16 and 30, or those, sorry, within On Track New York, it's young people within the ages of 16 to 30 who are within the first 2 years of having the experience of emerging mental health experiences and seeing, hearing things that others don't. So there is like a little bit more of a focus and a target in who we are working with, but having served on an ACT team as well, there's so much cross-pollination. There's so much that happens that I think really is appropriate for both. So I hope that you're able to come away. I think that our tools, while developed for CSC, I think are really valuable for ACT. I also think that our manual, our supervision checklists, and all of the things I'm about to show you will be helpful. So any other things we were hoping to learn today? Taking notes, of course. Hi, Steve. Always going right in for the hard one. Okay, so we can talk a little bit about this, the parameters. We won't go into too much detail, but I'm excited to sort of, when we're thinking about integration, I think our role within documentation is also important. And then we've got Michael in the room. Ooh, issues that may come up with peer specialists with split roles, specifically if you're serving as the peer specialist and also the Cs. So I want to acknowledge that there's coordinated specialty care models that look very different throughout the country. And so for On Track New York, it is specifically a standalone role. It is not a shared role. So what we can do is we can talk about the way that peer specialist values can be held regardless and incorporate it in, because peer specialists, especially when teams don't necessarily have that supported employment and education specialist role, peer specialists do a lot of job support with people. And so I think it's helpful to think about holding to our peer values while stepping into other elements of the work. And we can definitely take some time to think through that. I also saw Shay with her hand up.
Hi. Sorry, I'm like a little shy, but so I did have a question, but you kind of just answered it. That's why I lowered it. So I'm just really excited to hear more about that.
May I ask which question it was?
It was just like the roles, like, you know, like having the double roles, and then the other question I was gonna ask about was sitting in meetings about, you know, what's the clinical now. Yeah, I was gonna that, so it's like getting answered.
Isn't that what happens? We come into a community, a collective, and we realize that many of our questions are also each other's, and that we have some space to dialogue together. Okay. All right. Any final thoughts? Any questions? Not final thoughts, please interrupt me at any moment. Like, there is never a chance like this. We want this to be a conversation. So don't feel like this is your only opportunity, but I do want to make some space just in case anyone hasn't shared yet. Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do now is a little shameless promotion for On Track New York. So we at On Track New York are really, really proud of the work that we've done regarding the role of peer specialist. It is a process that has grown. On Track New York turned 10 years old last year. So it has been a slow process of growth. When On Track first became a model of care, peer support was a part of it from the very beginning. Lived experience was a part of it from the very beginning. Dr. Pat Deegan was involved. And so there's always been that perspective, but at the very beginning of On Track New York, the idea was that teams would connect with peer support out in the community. And so for the first couple of years that On Track New York existed, it was without the role of peer specialist as an internal member. And that became complicated. There was varying access to peer support in the community. There was sort of uncertainty about how to access, and it was an external support. So it wasn't someone who was a part of the team, who was a part of the dialogue. So in 2015, 2016, peer specialists started getting added to On Track New York teams. And at that point in time, they were a part-time position. Our teams consist of primary clinicians, outreach and recruitment specialists, our coordinators, supported employment education specialists, team leaders, a psychiatric care provider, and a nurse role. Some of these are full-time positions and some of these are part-time. So when the role of peer specialist was first added, it was added as a part-time role. And for a couple of years, it really sort of built itself up, building relationships with participants. And what we realized at On Track New York was two things. First, okay, we're onto something here. This is really a role that is thriving. At this moment in time, there was more funding for peer specialists throughout mental health programs. And so we really saw that this was a service within the team that was really valuable. And at the same time, we saw that having it be a part-time role made it really challenging for talented people to step into this work. They were either doing those split roles that we're going to talk a little bit about today, where they were only part-time with our program and working in other spaces part-time, or they were working part-time and sort of having to do other work to supplement their income. And what happened was we lost a lot of talented people to other work. And so what we wanted to do at On Track New York was really invest in this position and make it a full-time, fully integrated role. And so in 2021, we were able to bring in peer specialists full-time on all of our teams. And since then, it has only grown. So now that we know a little bit about the lay of the land, I am going to introduce you all to the On Track New York website. Bear with me, we're going to look at it together because there are just some really, really helpful things for anyone interested in learning more about peer specialists. And so what I have done here is I'm just sharing my screen so you can see our website, and I opened us up to our video library screen. So if you were to go to ontracknewyork.org, and scroll down, you'll see some of our videos, and you can click see more videos. If you do that, it will bring you to this page. I'll also drop this link in the chat box once I stop sharing. And what I really wanted to show here is, well, firstly, we have some phenomenal videos featuring on-trackers that I think are really great. And so yeah, take your time, enjoy them. But what I'm here to show you is something that we are so ecstatic about, which is these final 3 videos. We just recently released our Peer Specialist Introductory Training modules. These are huge. These are brief videos. They are interactive learning modules that people can do on their own time. They take about 10 to 12 minutes each to go through and learn about the On-Track New York Peer Specialist approach. So I strongly encourage anyone, if you've got a moment, go in, look through them, learn a little bit. You're going to hear from a variety of On-Track New York peer specialists. You're also going to hear from on-trackers and graduates from our program. And they're just pretty cool little interactive things that anyone can contact with and really learn. So we're thrilled these are here. We're also thrilled that they're publicly available. And I'm really excited to say that within New York State, where we are based, these modules are also available in our learning management system. And what we've been able to do with them there is get credit. So peer specialists are getting continuing education credits for viewing this module towards their peer specialist certification. So if you work in a state that has peer specialist certifications, I just want to sort of make a plug that we should start building content and material that is eligible for those hours, because we ask that all of our peer specialists in On-Track New York get certified through the state within the first year of hire. So we're really excited to be building up our capacity to offer continuing education credits for this role. So again, ontracknewyork.org, video library, peer specialist, chapter 1, 2, and 3. If you have 10 minutes, check out one of them. Just get a little taste. You'll want more. I feel comfortable saying that. I will also say that we are having more modules come out as we move. We are making a module for team members around the role of peer specialists. We are making a module on supervising peer specialists. We are so excited to be stepping into this new style of learning, and also really, really proud and excited that they're publicly available, that any person who is interested can go and view these and learn a little bit more about the role. While I'm here, I will also just say we're not here to talk about it today, but these shared decision-making modules also rock. And were developed in partnership with an expert steering committee that consisted of On-Track New York graduates, On-Track New York participants, On-Track New York providers, and they're really powerful. So enjoy, just have fun here. We're here to learn. We got all this fun content for you. So that's our video library. Excuse my scrolling, because I have one more thing I want to show you on this website. And so if you were to go to our menu, you go to get involved. Nope, don't go to get involved that way, y'all. Go to get involved and click this little arrow. Sorry, I really should have practiced this. Okay, and now we're on our peer specialist page. This is the link I will also drop in the chat box for you all. This is where all of our peer specialist tools are available. You can also be directed to this page if you go to the MapNet website. So good news if you don't want to do all the things I just did, just go to the MapNet website and click on it. And when you hit here, you will see a couple of things that I really want to direct your attention to. So the first one is our manual. This is a new revised manual for peer specialists. It was released last year, filled with information. My recommendation for those who are curious about our manual, just go to the table of contents. I acknowledge people are not going to read this 45-page manual, but if you go to the table of contents, it will show you all of the different sections of the manual, all of our frequently asked questions, and you can really use that to just like visit the pieces that are most interesting to you or feel most relevant to your work. And I got to say, those FAQs are not specific to On-Track New York. They're experiences of peer specialists. So if you are curious about those frequently asked questions, I would imagine there will be some stuff that's come up for you. We also have our participant peer specialist agreement, which is a cool tool that was co-created with On-Track New York peer specialists around some of the tricky conversations to have. What we're talking about today at peer specialist integration is this idea that we are a part of a clinical treatment team, but we are not clinical treatment providers. And so there's this tension in our role where we really need to make sure that we're always making the young people we're supporting aware of our role as a part of the team, aware of our responsibilities, and really truthfully aware of the power dynamic that is interrupting our ability to be truly peer with someone. We are a staff person. We do hold power in this relationship. And so that participant peer specialist agreement tool can be helpful. We have On-Track Maps, which is our flagship tool. This is a tool that was developed by Sasha Altman de Bruhl, the creator of T-Maps. He developed a version specific to On-Track called On-Track Maps. Again, super cool tool. If you're just interested, you want a little taste, just open that tool up. Take some time reviewing it. It's filled with thoughtful questions. The intention is that peer specialists will use this tool themselves, but will also share it with participants. Obviously, we're peer specialists. We're not recommending stuff that we haven't thought of ourselves. So we're map making for ourselves. And then if people are interested, we're going through the map making process with them. Lastly, we have the transformation timeline. That is a tool developed around self-disclosure for peer specialists to use to consider. Self-disclosure is a really tricky part of our work, and it is fluid. It's always changing. The parts we are cool with, the parts we want to keep to ourselves. And so the transformation timeline is just a tool that peer specialists can use to consider as they navigate self-disclosure and mutual disclosure in their relationships with participants. Then the final part, and then I will stop this shameless plug. But we also want to share our supervision checklists. Peer specialists and peer specialists on multidisciplinary teams are almost always supervised by a clinical provider. Might not be the case 100% of the time, but often that is the case. And so since we are being supervised by people who have not held the position that we hold, it's complicated. And there are more and more supports for supervisors, but we found this checklist to be a really helpful place. There is a version for peer specialists. There is a version for team leaders. It's not used for everybody. Not everyone wants a checklist for their supervision, but there's really thoughtful questions in there that I can urge everyone to consider at some point, particularly the remaining peer section. Okay, so I'll drop those links. Questions about our materials or accessing them before we move on?
I'd just like to say I read your manual a couple of times. I read the old version and the updated version, and it's superior to anything I've read. I use it as a guideline while I work. It's really filled with multiple things that you can, that I never thought of, how to interact. So thank you for sharing that publicly.
Your check's in the mail, Mike, for that. I really appreciate that. No. So I just want to say, this is a manual that was developed through On Track New York. I was very grateful to be able to play a role in putting this information together, but it stands on the shoulders of our history. These are not new ideas. This is not an approach built by On Track New York. This is an approach of peer support that we have been doing as a community for ages, that we tried to sort of take what we can and bring it into the coordinated specialty care. But we stand on the shoulders of all that came before us and of the consumer, survivor, and ex-patient movement that led to this being developed. Thank you. All right. So now we are going to do just a little bit of time, next 15 minutes or so, going through a couple of slides. Just to, well, for those of you who wanted to sit back and learn, this is your moment. We will be covering some On Track New York intro slides. If you are interested in more, I will just share that this is from our intro training deck. And I believe on the MapNet website, you can find the recorded training. So this we did in June of last year, and that is available. So you're only going to get a little taste of it today, and we'll go a lot deeper into dialogue than we did last time, but I do just want to plug that is available for you.
It might, I'll add, it might not be publicly on the website. I'll look to see if we have that link public, but email me if you're interested. I'll put my email in the chat. We're happy to share.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelsey. Yes, always correct me. I just say stuff sometimes. So often it feels incorrect. So in our general introduction training, we do offer a variety of topics that we are not going to be covering in depth today, but we are going to be really introducing the role of peer specialists within the team. and talking a little bit more about support. So we're going to be staying in the beginning part of this agenda today. I just like to level set. We had some great dialogue. People have shared some questions that really show that we're here today because we acknowledge that this is a role that is different than others. We know that. We're not here trying to sort of say like, how are we not clinical providers? Like, we get that we are not clinical providers, but I do like to sort of return to language for a moment. What does it mean to be peer? We talk about it a lot. We talk about being peer, remaining peer, peer specialist, all of that. And so if we look it up, it says a peer is one that is equal standing with another. In our work, there's sort of this way of being peer within the mental health system that makes it a job. That also really holds to being an identity of being a person who's been psychiatrically labeled. And when we think about what it means to be peer, it's not about a job, and nor is it about psychiatric labeling. What a peer is really at its core is a relationship. And a relationship that exists between two people that are of equal standing. This work is built on rejecting power over others, on rejecting the idea that we know what is happening to someone. We are not on this team to say, oh, this happened to me and that's what's happening to you. Oh, I know what's going on with this person because I've had this experience. At times we may feel the instinct to say those things, don't get me wrong. But really the idea is that we are building these relationships in which we know ourselves. And the person in front of us, we trust them to know themselves and to learn themselves. And we're really always striving to build relationships where, as much as possible within the confines of our role, we are of equal standing with those we are supporting. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we get into the themes of the role. But equal standing means that we receive support as well as give it. And that's different. That's different than the way that other people work on our team. And so I like to sort of call that into the conversation for us. Okay, so just take a moment, drink it in. This is a new slide that was not featured in our presentation last year. And so I just want to give a moment to our history. We didn't just show up on teams one day. People fought for their liberation for generations. People have fought against the labels placed upon them, the limitations of their civil liberties. All of these things are what led to peer specialists existing. And when we think about ourselves exclusively as a role within the mental health system without taking the time to honor our history and the fighting that it took to get us in the room, we are missing a part of what we're here for. We are not here to make treatment nice for people, to make programs fun for people. We might do that sometimes, but that is not our intention. We are here to hold space for individuals as they are, to break down the idea that these psychiatric labels that have been placed upon us define us. that these things that we experience differently than other people, that they are deficits, that they are a problem to be solved. We are here to lead with our lived experience, with the things that we've been through, to show that it is not the barrier to success that many is, that to really sort of question and check in about what we believe, what biases we hold, what understandings we have about individuals who have been psychiatrically labeled and individuals who identify as having a disability. And the thought that they are those who are in need of services, in need of support, and not those who are just as capable of giving as receiving. Really, we want to spend a second here. So with that, I'm going to give y'all a little sneak peek of some of the work that we're doing. And so I'm going to share a really brief video that we have in our new module that is not yet available. I'm going to share one of our videos so that you can learn just 30 seconds to learn a little bit more about our history. Bear with me. I'm going to have to click on buttons when I share my screen. Okay, you can see it. You're going to play video.
The mutual support that later developed into the profession of peer support began during the consumer survivor ex-patient movement. This movement had been organizing to protect the rights of people who had been psychiatrically labeled. Part of that organizing work involved supporting each other, often as an explicit alternative to the formal mental health system. Although the role of peer support has since developed into a profession within the mental health system, it still retains a focus on rights, total rejection of coercion, and mutuality.
Cool. Okay. Thank you all for joining with me for that. That's very exciting. We can't wait for those modules to be available. But you can get a little bit more of it today if you just visit ontracknewyork.org/video library and view our peer specialist modules. Okay. Again, cell over. So now we're going back to our slide deck.
In this training, you'll learn about the critical theme.
Excuse me for one moment. Now the video is continuing without me. Thank you for bearing with me. I am back. Just a slight technical issue on my end, but we're back. Okay, so back to our slide deck. So again, we are on a place where you are viewing a slide that you can learn more about how we talk about this quote in our training if you were to visit our recording. But where I really want us to be is I just want us to spend a moment here. Anti-oppression and peer specialist work. Here we are going to do a bit of an activity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through this slide, talk about it for a moment or two, and then I want us each to take a few minutes of reflection and answer these questions in front of us. So what we want to do is we want to consider how peer specialists and all of us can bring anti-oppression into our work more meaningfully. Part of being a peer specialist is bringing all of ourselves, good and bad, into our work and really considering the impact of the identities we hold and the background we come from for ourselves and for those that we are supporting. And this is something that all members of the coordinated specialty care team should, or really all people working within this system should take some time and consider. And so for a lot of you, this might be a place that you've spent a lot of time. You've done a lot of reflection on your identity. You bring it into your work every day. Commend you. It is hard to do. So for you, this might be a really easy practice. For some of us, these might be harder questions to answer. And so if you have pen and paper, if you've got your phone, if you just want to close your eyes and take some time for reflection, I would like for each of us to take 5 minutes and write down or think about the answers to these. Who we are. How do we define ourselves? How do we identify? What are the words that come up when we think, who am I? Where do we sit in the hierarchy and in the system of the mental health care? Are we someone who is a supervisor? Are we someone who is a psychiatric care provider? Are we someone who's a recipient of services? Where does that put us in the hierarchy of the system that we exist within? And what have those experiences taught us? How do we consider ourselves, our families, our health, and the other domains of our lives? What words do we use to describe them? What meaning do they hold? Are they something that gives us privilege and strength? Are they something that has left us feeling disadvantaged or marginalized? What belief systems do we hold around them? And then lastly, what systems have we touched? In what ways? And how has that impacted us? Whether it is stepping into a system as a provider, as a family member, and as a person. And that whether it is the mental health system that we are all a part of, what is called the justice system, really think through what systems have we touched and how has that impacted us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to encourage people to go off camera, and I'm going to set a 5-minute timer for us. I will put those questions in the chat box, and I ask for each of us to take a moment to really ponder and consider what those identities mean and how we are not going to be expected to share back. This is a practice in reflection, not a practice in open sharing. So with that, I am going to share the screen so that I don't have to do that. And I will see you all at 12:12. Okay. And we're back. All right. Thank you all for taking a moment to ponder who you are, what you carry with you into the room. I will just add that a part of what peer specialists strive to do is really not just acknowledge who we are, but acknowledge again the power and privilege that we may hold, and the power and privilege that we absolutely do hold as providers on a team, regardless of our other identities when we are working with someone that is a part of our relationship. And so we see it as a part of our job to acknowledge it, to call it out, to call it in, to make it present, and to talk about power dynamics, because power is always in the room with us, whether or not we want it to be, whether or not we cannot talk about it all day long. That doesn't actually make it not present. And so as peer specialists in our efforts to be authentic and transparent in relationships, we do always want to call that piece in. So should anyone be interested, I will open the floor up if people want to sort of talk a little bit about how that felt for them, if this is something you do regularly in your work. If this was new, if this is not new. If this is part of your practice professionally that you do often alongside people, you can use the chat box if you'd rather not say it on camera for a recorded webinar. That makes sense. So I will just say for myself that this is not a part of the work that I always did as a peer specialist. This was not a part of my training when I came into the role in 2010. There wasn't much training in 2010, to be fair, but that when we're not bringing this into our practice as peer specialists, and when we are bringing peer specialists onto our teams without considering this part of the work, that is a huge barrier to having us exist as a part of it. Like we can't be in places where we're not talking about who we are, what we've been through. Oh, and I'm so grateful to hear that this is a regular part of people's work and an ongoing part of our work. Steve.
Yeah, I think in terms of identity, the thing that has taken me a while to learn, but that I think I've finally gotten a better grasp on is that, like, even if I was trying to create parallels with myself and people serve, that like there is just so much nuance and so much subjectivity that, like, beyond the power dynamic, I wasn't trying to have a power dynamic, but like, just realizing that like the truth of it is that we're all different and there might be parallels, but still like everyone's so subjective. So I've like really thought a lot about like, like in the beginning, I used to be like, oh yeah, we have this in common, that in common. And the more it becomes more nuanced, it's like, no, there are differences. There are like, it's so much different when people are conveying what they're truly thinking as opposed to just like being in agreement. So I don't know, that's something I've like come to learn better as I've gotten better at the work and kind of let go of the power dynamics. And now I'm just like, why do you want power at all? Like it doesn't do anything. It's not cool. So yeah. Yeah.
But don't get me wrong, I could talk power dynamics all day. It's a great time. But I do want to be mindful. So we will hear from Eileen.
I just wanted to add to that I think the only time I want to be in a position of power is when I'm using it and leveraging it to help amplify other people's voices and lift them up. So I often have power. The question is, am I using it in a way that's helpful to the people I'm supporting?
Beautiful. Yeah, acknowledging it. It's there, whether or not we want it to be, and how can we use it to serve, and how can we share power? How can we empower? How can we create spaces that are empowering for others? Okay, Beautiful. I also just want to chat, if you are not in the chat box, we got some great stuff in there thinking about the impact of trauma, the trauma in this work. We are going to do one more activity. And so I'll give us a bit of an introduction into that activity before we go into breakout rooms. So if you haven't done a breakout room before, you are all already assigned. So once I go through this next slide, it should pop up, join breakout room, click it. Awesome. Okay. So this next slide is about themes of the work of peer specialists. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take a moment and do a little understanding check for each of them. These are the 7 themes within the On Track New York approach that we really have taken some time to highlight, both in our manual and in our training spaces, and are important conversations to have. And so those themes are mutuality and reciprocity, which is, I think, something that we've talked around but haven't talked explicitly about as much today, which is the idea of giving and receiving, of forming bidirectional relationships, of really truly striving to have mutuality and reciprocity be a part of what we do by giving and receiving support, by being present with someone, by allowing space for people who we are in relationship with to be as they are and for us to be as we are. Taking a learning stance as peer specialists. The beauty of our job is that we know nothing. I love saying that. It's like my favorite part of training. It's like, know nothing. I don't have to know anything. I do not have to have the answer to any question unless it's a question I'm like asking myself. And so I think we're oftentimes socialized into clinical treatment settings by feeling like we need to learn all the jargon and we need to use it so people take us seriously. And like, we don't actually. We need to hold to what we do know and to claim our power and our territory in that way, but also to always be able to say, I don't know what that means. What, can you say that again? Can you explain that to me? And for participants to make sure that we're not going into those relationships saying, I know what's happening here. Ah, yes, this is it. This must be this diagnosis, or you must be having this experience, and I know what that means. No, we are always learning. What do you think is happening? What feels right to you? What is going on with you? Really always having this attitude of curiosity and a desire to know more deeply, but never trying to claim that knowledge for someone else's experience. In the same vein, the third one is allowing the participant to lead. In rejecting power over, we are never making decisions for someone. We are never saying, okay, great, I'll see you at 4 o'clock. We're going to do on-track maps. Would you like to meet? When do you want to meet? Where do you want to meet? How do you want to meet? Like, what do we want to talk about? Like, really giving someone else that ability to be the leader in our relationship. At times, they might ask for us to step forward and say, it would be really helpful if you would schedule. And so we're game to that, but we always want to make sure that we're first offering the opportunity for someone else to make those decisions for our relationship. Fourth, this is my favorite. Well, those of you assigned to this room, like, have some fun in there. Non-coercive, period. Peer specialists will never utilize threat or force. We are not the people who says, I think this person needs to go to the hospital. I don't think they're safe right now. Unless someone's coming and using those exact words to us about themselves, we aren't there. But at On Track New York, that does not mean that we are not a part of the conversation. If a team is ever considering something, utilizing coercion or force or hospitalization or picking up the phone to call 911, we want the peer specialist in the room as a part of the conversation, because we need someone in the room saying, hey, this is what they want. Hey, this is what they said. Here is their advanced directive. Here is their on-track maps. Have we tried this? Are we doing this? Can we call them in? We are always trying to ensure that people are making their own decisions. And so non-coercive is an essential part of our job and is an essential element of what we bring to the team. Non-hierarchical, rejecting the hierarchy that we exist within. This one's complicated. We work in a very hierarchical system. We work in a team that is subject to the same hierarchy as the world. And so striving in our role to treat every voice as equally important, whether it's the psychiatric care provider, it's the parent, it's the best friend, it's ourselves, so that we are really striving to hold all perspectives evenly and equally, and reject the idea that an opinion has more value because of who it came from. Okay, actually, I take it back. I think that there's, okay, all of these are really fun rooms to be in. Have fun. Because the next one, oh, I love this part of the job. That not knowing gets a little bit more specific here. We are holding multiple perspectives about what is happening to someone outside of clinical and biomedical understandings. So that means that we are allowing people to define their mental health for themselves. They do not need to come to us and agree with their psychiatric label and see what is happening to them as an element of their mental health. We get to meet them and learn about their relationship with their higher power, the impact of the experiences they have that we might not, the things that they see that we do not, the things that they may hear that we do not, the perceptions they have that we may not. How do they understand it? What does it mean to you? And how do we get to hold that space for them? Oh, it's beautiful. And then lastly, these are relationships with individual people. They are going to look different. And we are going to try to meet every person where they are in the way that we can. And so questions about these themes, any, not questions about sort of how we do them, because those are the questions you're going to answer, but questions about what they mean. So it is 12:23. I'm going to give myself 2 minutes to figure out breakout rooms. So at 12:25, we will be in breakout rooms. We are going to go in for 15 minutes. So that means each person should have 2 to 4 minutes to share. So want to be thoughtful about hearing every voice in the breakout room. Your breakout room will be assigned as one of those themes. I want you all to go into the room and talk about how, one, as a peer specialist, this is how I do this work. If you are someone who holds the identity of a peer specialist in the room, and if you are someone who holds another team role, in my role, this is how I can support the peer specialist or how I can partner with the peer specialist as they do this work. And so I really want, so I'm calling in on our clinical colleagues today to think a little bit about the way that you support this, the way that you are showing up. If you have great things that peer specialists do that you've seen that you want to bring into the conversation too, that's okay, but don't like live there exclusively. We want to talk about how you're going to honor this too. Okay, any questions? Okay. So those of you who have to leave, we are glad to have you for as long as we did. That means the people in your breakout room get a little bit more time. So yay. I see someone has joined by phone. I just want to make you aware you are about to be sent into the focused on the individual relationships room because you will not be able to see that as you join. So with that, I'm going to open all rooms and I will see you back here at 12:40. Welcome back from your breakout rooms. Okay, so we just were in 7 rooms together talking through some of the themes of the work. We did not assign a note taker or anyone to report back, so that is, it's not a requirement that we hear from the different rooms, but I am curious, did anybody learn something or hear something really cool, or do we want to shout out another member who was in the breakout room for us who said something that we found to be like, I don't know, we're going to chew on it later. I just want to open it up. Any reactions or thoughts from your breakout rooms?
Absolutely. Hi, Abby. Hi, everyone. My name is Sherry, and I was in a room with Maria and Jessica, I believe. And something that Jessica said that stood out to me was like the relationship of the peer that's different from what a clinician's relationship is, and how we wouldn't recommend them going to the hospital or something like that, like you said. And I thought that was really important because I think we often have our own biases and, belief systems that may affect how we listen to somebody. But I think, to practice being present is one of my goals as a peer. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Those of you who have to step out, we're glad to have you for whatever time we got you. So thank you. Any other reflections on the breakout room activities?
I think in ours, I was with Margaret, John, and Danielle. It was just like being at work, communicating with other people, all common. Do you know what I mean? We were on the same page, talking about different things. It was really, that's what I do on a daily basis. And presto.
Excellent. Cool. I can
Yeah.
add, I was in one of the dyads, so I've had a great one-on-one conversation. But one thing that we talked about that I think maybe applies to all of the groups is, the extent to which these, all of these values and things are very specific to the peer role, but in some ways can be embodied by everybody on the team, or at least understood by everybody on the team, in the same way that not everybody is an employment specialist, but can understand that person's goals with work and school and help them in their individual roles. Or not everybody is a psychiatrist, but can understand that person's needs with medication and kind of support them where that's concerned. And so like that, even though these are like peer roles, that they're helpful to everybody who is working with, the individuals on the team.
I appreciate that, Kelsey. And I hope so. That's really, I think that there's such variability in the ways that different people do this work but the thing that called us all into work in this field is a desire to be of support to people. I think that's a universal thing that we all share regardless of how we step into it. But in some ways, when you go through your training and credentialing process, a lot of that initial pull to the system, you learn things that at times feel like they're at odds with it or that are pulling you in different directions. And so I often speak to the privilege of peer work because I know exactly where I'm standing. I know exactly, like I know my values, I know my role. I can step in fully because while we absolutely have boundaries and ethics, like don't get me wrong, we do, they are different and they allow us to be really present in a cool way. So I think that I'll bring us back to like a question that some of you might have, which is like, how is talking about these values about integrating peer specialists? It's because to integrate peer specialists, you have to understand peer specialists and you have to value peer specialists. And that's what these values really offer us, is a glimpse into what a peer specialist is bringing that, don't get me wrong, can feel really challenging sometimes. Can sometimes feel like it's making the process harder, or it's adding more time, or it's, oh God, she's in the room, I gotta watch what I have to say. Good. No, just kidding. But I think really thinking about this idea that like it is an essential part of the work that we are all hoping to do, is bringing in the voice of change agents, the voice of innovative disruptors. We have to disrupt. And that can feel uncomfortable, and we get that and we see that, and that's not a good reason to not have it happen. And so having spaces for open dialogue across roles, across disciplines, not specific to an individual we are supporting, is a really important part of integrating peer specialists. If you're only talking to us about a specific role, about a specific work, and you're not knowing more deeply the way that we are showing up, it's going to make it a lot harder. And so that is one element that I just want to celebrate. So in our final like 10 plus minutes together, we had some questions, some of which that we can answer fully, some of which that could be their own thing. So I am going to go up and sort of go through in chronological order, and I want to like call in all the peers and experts in this room to join me in our responses. So the very first one came up about peer specialists attending team meeting and balancing with clinical perspective. So we're going to start there. In On Track New York, every organization and agency is different in the way that it looks, but in On Track New York, it is essential that every team member be in the team meeting. So they are scheduled, even though we have like the nurse role is like 0.2, like we have limited FTE for certain roles, and it's still essential that we schedule the meeting at a time that every team member is available. And how do we balance the perspectives? By living in those values, by valuing all the perspectives, by saying, wow, we're hearing a lot from the clinical members on our team. Have we heard from the peer specialist? Do we have a structure of a team meeting that allows for every voice to be heard? Are we designating certain topics to when the peer specialist speaks up? Or are we having a free space? And this is where team leaders in the room, you all you all can back us in this. Call us in, make space for us. Don't always leave it to us. I remember I have such a visceral memory of being in team meeting and like sitting on the very edge of my seat, just like waiting for that person to take a breath that was long enough for me to insert myself. And it's so beautiful when someone else can say, hey, you work with this person, or I know this is the time, and we can be called in. We'll call ourselves in too, but it's great when we don't have to. Margaret, please.
I was just wanting to understand the motivation for the question. Like, is there any reason one would think that wasn't a good idea?
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's what
Margaret, I asked the question and I can clarify. I think what happens is that there's a great deal of detail shared about the person's life, about clinical diagnoses, substances. I mean, you name it. It's very detailed in clinical rounds. And so I think it can then complicate at times the relationship when a peer may come in and try to be on even playing ground and get to know that person almost as a blank slate, but they already are coming in having known like what they ate for breakfast level of detail that was discussed in rounds. So that's where it's coming from.
Thank you for asking that question, Margaret. By the way, just sorry, I love a little bit more detail. But please, Amanda.
I think the other thing that I've heard is that some peers don't actually like to be a part of the team meeting because of all the medical model perspective that happens. Sure. And so, but I think I'm super curious about this though, because I think what you, Abby, were saying is that, sorry, I missed your introduction. Is that how you say your name? Okay. So Abby was saying is as though that like the values of or the themes of the values, I like love the idea of like, how do we integrate that into the team meeting? And if a peer is uncomfortable with all of this stuff, like, is it I just have so many questions. So here we are.
I'm going to put my email in the chat box as well so we can follow up. I like this. I live and breathe this stuff. I love talking about it. But I will just say there are coordinated specialty care teams and other places that utilize intentional peer support as it's intended to be. And I will just say the state of Maine is the one that I'm most aware of where this is not the practice. And so we're not here to say there's one way to do this, there's a right way to do this. Those practicing intentional peer support as it is intended choose to not engage with any of the clinical practice. At On Track New York, we really want this to be a part of every bit of the care. And so we've opted to go a different direction. And while intentional peer support very much informs a lot of our work, we do not align with it in the way that a peer specialist is like, we actually think that if a peer specialist is not at the team meeting, that the team meeting is not complete. And so I think it would be, we would offer TA and support to give people what they need so they feel comfortable being in that room, because that might be really good supervision. That might be really thoughtful ground rules about how we can do interruptions or how we can do planning. Like there's ways to support someone in feeling more comfortable. I don't want to deny that there's complications there, but for our model and our approach, we really require the peer specialist to be a part. They're an equal member of the team. They're a part of the team meeting. Please, Jacob, I see you.
Yeah, awesome. So I think part of this, at least in my experience, a part of it is also the culture of the workspace. And so like, somebody was saying, or I think you said, the team lead can help significantly with this. I was very fortunate when I came in for the peers that had worked in the role before me. They had set the groundwork, so I was never looked at any differently as part of the team. I was allowed to share, but I did have a responsibility to learn what and when to share. And what was relevant to the conversation. And so there was a balancing act. That I had the opportunity, but I also had a balance. So one of the things that we've done in Idaho is we've done agency readiness for peers, informing them about peers and what their role is, how they interact. And I think you talked about this earlier, supervision for peers can be different. And so I think those are some of the pieces that will help navigate that team meeting a little more effectively for the peers, at least my experience.
I fully back that, and I'll admit in New York, and actually I feel like in Massachusetts too, in order to get a contract for an on-track New York team, like these are things that we are asking of. These are expectations of that contract. And so having that agency readiness, having that training for supervisors for agency leadership is a big part of it. I also just want to, if you're not in the chat box, be in the chat box. There's great stuff happening in here. And again, like we are not saying this is the way to do it. This is our model and approach to care. And so being really thoughtful that we celebrate the variety of ways that people step into peer support is not peer specialist work. It can't be. There's too much power in the room for it to be true peer support. True peer support are two people who find each other, who are just along with each other. Peer specialist work, there's many different ways to step into it that can honor the principles of peer support. And so I think being really thoughtful about what your agency, what your organization, what your personal preferences are, and the model of care that you are offering and how that fits in. Because I agree, I see some of the chat box about the only being in spaces where participants are. I love that. But I also think that sometimes things can be lost. And so if we get someone's permission to hold the perspective for them in the places they aren't, and to get their language, to get their understanding and advocate on behalf of them in those spaces, I think can also be really powerful. But again, it's not a right and wrong way. We're peer specialists, like we live in gray. There is no black and white. Like there's never one answer. There's always a myriad of options. So I do just want to call that out. We are running out of time. So I will just do like turbo speed response. Cs and peer specialist split roles. Can you hold peer specialist values for all of them? I believe you can. But really, I think you can if you're also being a clinical provider. You can't hold those two values simultaneously. They do not fit together. They are two hats. You can wear one, you can wear the other, you can't wear them both. But I think if you're doing employment work from the perspective of a peer specialist, if you're building a peer specialist relationship with someone, even if you're also doing employment work, it is really important and valuable that you hold to the values of peer support, which means you are not telling someone what to do. You are not like setting the agenda. You are not setting like if you can live in those 7 values as you're doing employment and education support, then I think that that's how you hold those dual roles. Shay. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my question is if you have the split role of being a peer specialist and a counselor for the program, how to balance that kind of.
That's a really tricky one. And I will admit this is where I can't speak for the model. That is not a part of the On Track New York model. We hold exclusively to the role of peer specialist being peer specialist. So I would say that would be a really tricky conversation to have with your organization, with your supervisor. And I wish I could offer more support, but to be peer cannot coexist with the role of clinical provider. And so with that, let's not end on that. Hold on. So I will also just say I got a question about benefits. I would just highly recommend in New York State, we have what's called the Medicaid buy-in for working people with disabilities, which is a way that people can maintain benefits even while they're working. That's a really powerful resource for peer specialists who are on benefits, but also looking to increase their hours of work. I think all peer specialists should be greatly aware of entitlements, of how they are utilized, of how they are misutilized, and that we should call things what they are, which is to live a life on benefits is to live a life below the poverty line. And that peer specialists deserve more than that, and individuals who are psychiatrically labeled deserve more than that. For those of you who that it works for and it serves you, there is no judgment there. We love you, we see you, but we do not want that to be the expectation for this role. We want us to be paid more. We want us to we can't talk about it without talking about it. And so I will just say that, and that will be the final thought before I kick it back to Kelsey. Thanks, y'all. It's been a pleasure. Send me an email if you want to talk more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Abby. And for folks who are in our Massachusetts cohort who have not been joining our monthly calls, yeah, please let us know, and we're happy to join you or to add you to those as well. So just one housekeeping thing, we will send out a survey afterwards. Would love to get some feedback on the call. So keep an eye on your email for that. Ikra, if you can post that in the chat now too, just so folks have it. But yeah, thank you so much, Abby, and really great conversations today, everyone. So with that, enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thanks for joining us. And yeah.
Hi everyone, welcome. This is Lola. I am the Harvard Psych Coordinator for New England MHTTC. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. I'll just go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. Participant microphones will be muted at entry. If you have questions during the event, please use the chat. This session is being recorded and it will be emailed out to all participants once available, along with the slides. If you have questions after this session, please email newengland@mhttcnetwork.org. At the end of this month, MHTTC will send you a certificate of completion that you can submit to your particular board if you would like CE credit. Please contact ifisher@c4innovates.com for more information after the event. This slide includes our MHTTC disclaimers. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. That language is strengths-based and hopeful, inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, healing-centered and trauma-responsive, inviting to individuals participating in their own journeys, person-first and free of labels, non-judgmental and avoiding assumptions, respectful, clear, and understandable, and lastly, consistent with our policies, actions, and products. And with that, I will hand it over to Kelsey for some introductions.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Lola. So today we're going to have Dr. Emily Gagan speak with us about metacognitive therapy for psychosis. So Emily is a longtime collaborator of us at MathNet, so we're very excited to have her. So by way of a brief introduction, Emily is a licensed clinical psychologist at the Brookline Community Mental Health Center. She's the director of the Massachusetts Psychosis Access and Triage Hub, known as MPATH, and is also a member of the team at the Center for Early Detection, Assessment, and Response to Risk, called CEDAR. So Dr. Gagan has worked with individuals with psychosis and schizophrenia spectrum disorders for 15 years and specializes in the treatment of young adults with early psychosis. So I'll pass it off to Emily to pull her slides off and get us started. But yeah, thank you, Emily, for joining us.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. And thanks to everyone for joining. Excited to talk with you about this today. Let me share my screen. Excuse me. So I'm going to talk today about a particular approach to psychosis called Merit. Sorry, just fixing my view here. And also going to talk about what metacognition is and why that's relevant for folks. Oops, sorry. For this conversation. And then also how we measure metacognition, what's the evidence for deficits in psychosis and the relationship between those deficits and other aspects of illness and recovery. And then, as I said, what is Merit? What is the treatment? It's important to note, which I'll probably come back to, but Merit is an integrative framework rather than some sort of highly manualized treatment. So the goal is that people from many different backgrounds and theoretical orientations can learn this approach and implement it in different ways. But the hope for today is really that you leave with an idea of what metacognition is, why it matters in treating psychotic disorders, and have some idea of how to approach this in some of the challenges that you might have working with folks with these experiences, if that's part of your role. First, I want to acknowledge Dr. Paul Lysaker. He was the founder and creator of Merit. He's a psychologist who worked for many years in this area, was very prolific in his writings about metacognition and why it's important. He suddenly passed away in the summer this past year. And, I had the great fortune of working with him as a predoctoral intern and continued to for several years afterwards, and learned a great deal from him really about what it means to listen to folks, right? To sit with them in their distress and to really try to understand, sometimes rather than to fix, which I think is a really important lesson to learn. This is his most recent book that is a really great read. In fact, I have it right here. It's not too long. So if folks are curious and want to read more, I think that's a great resource as well. So first of all, what is metacognition? Well, I'm going to start with talking about why some understandings of mental illness or conceptualizations of mental illness are incomplete. So psychosis is often discussed or represented in terms of a particular diagnosis, right? A diagnostic label, which is linked to some collection of symptoms that people are experiencing, right? That, qualify for some sort of diagnosis. And these symptoms are describing some sort of unusual or, out of the ordinary kind of experiences that people have. However, that description is not a complete picture, right, of what it is like to be that person, nor is it a complete account of, someone's experience of how they got to where they are, things like that. Mental illness, and particularly psychosis or psychotic disorders, is also often thought of as a kind of collection of skill deficits, right? Ways in which a person might struggle with independence, caring for themselves, maintaining relationships, maintaining employment, things like that. Again, an incomplete picture, right? Or often discussed as some sort of something in the brain that isn't working quite right. Some sort of malfunction, the idea that there's something broken in the brain, a chemical imbalance, something like that. But none of these, really fully capture what a person with psychosis is experiencing. You're describing the symptoms or the label, but that doesn't help you understand who the person is who's sitting across from you, right? It misses what matters to that person, what has happened to them up until this moment, what's contributed to their pain, to their struggles, as well as their hope for the future, what they would like to be doing. What are their goals? Why are their goals important? Things like that. And so, to be able to help people make sense of their experiences and help them figure out what they want to do next, we need to understand people in this way, right? We're concerned about the person's unique experience and the meaning that they make of it. So if I'm going to tell you then why those descriptions are incomplete, and why it's more than symptoms and skill deficits, then this is, kind of a means of doing that. So this is a list of things that people with psychosis may experience, right? A lack of agency, of feeling like you have control over what happens to you, whether you can make change in your life, things like that. A lack of possibility of what might be possible in the future, of what, options are available to you. There's at times confusion about what are the challenges that you're facing, right? What is it that you're struggling with, and how, if you're having trouble with that, then you can have also trouble addressing them, right? And then also isolation from others in your community. And so as time goes on without intervention, the likelihood of these things continuing is quite high. But if we start to work on recovery, a key element of this is starting to be able to integrate your experiences, right? To understand how, for example, your internal states are linked to the events in your life, to what happens around you, to you, as a result of you, things like that. To be able to, work on recovery, people also need to have a sense of what their goals are, right? So think about yourself. Like, what are your plans for your life? What matters to you? Why? Right? All of those answers are linked to things, to events in your life, things that have happened to you, aspects of your personality, ways that you approach relationships, challenges you faced, etc. Right? So in this process, we want to be helping people to form an account of why they have struggled in their life over time, and what those struggles mean, and how they basically, how they got to where they are now. In this process, people can begin to understand themselves in a new way and start to identify what are my thoughts, what are my emotions, what are my desires, my hopes for the future. And so as recovery evolves and a person is able to form this more complete account of their life over time, their struggles, people are more able to take on the tasks of what we might refer to as self-management, right? If you're able to better understand what it is that you're struggling with, you're better able to understand how you might deal with it, or how you want to deal with it, right? So what emerges is then a sense of agency, that you're making a change in your own life, a sense of possibility, right? Of hope for the future, of what could be possible. The challenges that you have become more easily understood when you have a language for this, and then you have ideas about how to manage these challenges. And then also you become, or perhaps rejoin your community, whatever community that might be. So conceptualizing mental illness or psychosis in this case as any one of the previously mentioned areas is inadequate, right? It doesn't capture this process of what it means to be human, to suffer, nor does it capture really, the road back from suffering and the evolution of a life and the understanding of that evolution over time. So conceptualization that, we'll talk about today is hopefully an opportunity to do that, right? An attempt to try to capture the suffering that people face, as well as the process of recovery and what that, how is that defined by the person having these experiences. So finally, we get to then, what is metacognition, right? It's a term that gets used a lot in a lot of different literature. I think originally it might have came from the education literature to describe ways in which people are aware of their learning style and process of learning, things like that. Really, it covers a broad spectrum of mental activity. So on the one end of the spectrum is these very specific and discrete experiences that are happening in a person's mind. On the other end, there are these larger, more complex processes. So on that more specific end, basically, at a very basic level, it's a thought about a thought, which maybe sounds a little out there. I hope I didn't lose anyone. But it's really the experience of knowing what is in your mind, right? The awareness of having a memory, the awareness or the feeling of knowing something. If we think a little more complexly, then we're thinking about how you have an awareness of your thoughts and you can make judgments about them, right? So you're kind of aware of it and you're evaluating the thought that you have in your mind. So there are a lot of terms that are often in this same genre or, same area. Things like cognitive judgments or confidence ratings, right? Error monitoring, being able to tell how well you learned something or whether you got something wrong or right. The idea of social cognition, right? The ability to know things about others, make guesses about others. Social cognition often refers to the accuracy of some specific or singular perception in a particular moment in interaction with someone else. A very related concept, or some might say a sub-concept of this is theory of mind, right? So knowing and making guesses about other people's intentions, their tone, things like that. And then if we move kind of up or down the spectrum of complexity to more complex, then we're talking about what we call synthetic acts. And when we say synthetic, we mean we're synthesizing this information, right? We're being able to integrate a lot of data from all these thoughts that we have, these emotions, these memories, and we're forming a complex idea of what's happening or about a person or about a situation. So for instance, what happens when you meet someone, right? You immediately begin to form some idea about who they are, just about them in general. The next time you see them, you might gather more information. You begin to expand this understanding of who this person is. You're integrating new information each time you meet this person. And that picture becomes richer and more complex. It's also important to keep in mind context, right? That, the ideas that we form about people are relevant or are influenced by the context. So, for example, the ideas I might have about a colleague, that I work on a work project with will be different than if perhaps later on that colleague starts dating a sibling of mine, right? Something like that. Like these ideas are fluid and they're changing based on the context. So what I want to make clear, I guess, is that metacognition is not just a theory or a judgment that I form about someone else, but it's a process by which a lot of information from multiple sources is coming together to form this kind of more complex idea. So another example might be on a basic level, you're aware that you're feeling anxious, right? You have this awareness, this knowledge that is what you're feeling in this moment. Moving up the scale of complexity, then you might be able to know that you are feeling anxious and this is subjective, right? And that there may or may not be some sort of threat that's causing your anxiety, and that your judgment of this is fallible, meaning it might be reasonable or not reasonable to be anxious, but that is what your subjective experience is in the moment. And then on that even more complex or the synthetic level, you're able to form an idea of why you might be feeling anxious. You might think back to experiences you've had before. It might remind you of another time in your life where you had something negative happen, you felt out of control, or things went poorly. Something that you can say, ah, yes, this past experience has led to now me also feeling anxious in this situation. It's this understanding of this longer term narrative of who you are as a person and what has led you to, be the person you are, experience the things that you do, things like that. Some key assumptions when we're talking about this sort of thing: metacognitive ability can be measured, and we'll talk about how we do that in a moment. People differ in their ability to engage in metacognition. So others might have a higher level than I do. I might be on a higher level of metacognition than others. This also changes both across people and also person to person, or within person, right? So metacognitive ability can vary based on the situation or the context. It's far easier, for example, to think deeply about yourself and the world when you're in a quiet room than perhaps it is in some sort of loud, noisy public transportation or, a bus or a party. It's also perhaps more difficult to do this sort of thing in the midst of something really emotionally upsetting, like a recent loss or a terrible argument you might have had. Also, metacognition is an intersubjective act. And what I mean by that is ideas that I form about myself and other people are not in a vacuum. They're not created in my head independent of other people, right? You're not really deciding if you're funny, right? You don't get to decide that. You're making that judgment based on information you've received, feedback you've received from other people you've deemed to be funny, and how that relates to you, things like that. You're not the only one deciding if you're empathic. You're taking into account information, feedback you've gotten from others when you've said or done things. You've watched other people respond and judged whether they seem to be empathic, things like that. There are these are things that we are deciding basically with other people. They're complex ideas, but we're putting them together with information from others. So it is intersubjective and gives us a sense of then who we are, or who other people are, or who we are to other people. Also, deficits in metacognition may be due to a variety of factors, right? So there might be trauma that disrupts someone's ability to bring in new information or integrate new information to their experiences. There might be disrupted attachments, poor relationships early on in someone's development. There may be developmental deficits. There may be neurocognitive impairments. Some people may struggle to put these complex ideas about themselves together because it's too painful, right? You may prefer, and when I say prefer, that makes it sound volitional. It often isn't. It's subconscious or not part of our purposeful intentions, but may prefer a less coherent or a less rich picture of themselves and the world around them because there's been too much loss or too many negative things have happened to really bear the possibility of having this more like nuanced picture of yourself. So as I hopefully have impressed upon you, metacognition is something that we use all the time, right? We do it or we use it every day. We're often unaware of it, but it's a necessary condition, right? To navigate relationships, to navigate the world. So when this capacity becomes impaired, real problems can emerge, right? So people with psychosis do demonstrate a loss in metacognitive capacity. So it's this loss of this ability to form these integrated ideas about oneself, other people, about the world. And as you might imagine, then this can result in a reduction in what's phrased here as complex goal-directed behavior. But what we mean is like, if we have trouble forming all these complex ideas, it makes sense, or it follows then that we have trouble moving forward and deciding, what we want to do, knowing who we are and what our values are and how we want to move forward in life. That becomes difficult. So the collapse of this ability to do this is referred to as fragmentation, right? So this there may be, like, for example, in a difficulty with distinguishing like what's happening in my own mind versus someone else's mind. And that, as a result, you might come to some conclusions that don't necessarily make sense to others. Or if you can't form complex ideas about other people and who they are and how they exist in the world, you might come to the conclusion that many things or most things in the world have some relation to you. There's really this disruption in meaning making and being able to make meaning of the experiences that you are having. And it's strongly linked, as we said, to major disruptions in one's life that may cause this fragmentation. So this capacity, this ability, is where we need to intervene. This framework would argue, to help people move towards recovery, right? People aren't going to be able to necessarily make their own goals, form relationships, manage psychological distress without this capacity. I'm not going to go into the long history of early descriptions of psychosis, but this idea of this fragmented sense of self really fits with early ideas about, psychosis and psychotic disorder, schizophrenia. If we think about the term, right, schizophrenia, split mind, it is this fragmented sense of self. And it also really fits with a number of first-person accounts of what it's like to have these experiences, right? That life feels fragmented. You feel perhaps frozen, or that you've lost a part of yourself, or you can't make sense how you're connected to others. And as we've said, you might imagine, it's a pretty significant barrier to recovery. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the research in terms of what these deficits are linked to. Very broadly, though, it's linked to negative and disorganized symptoms, poorer work performance, as well as general functioning, and then also poorer response to more traditional psychosocial treatments. So how do we measure this then, right? We've talked a lot about these kind of very big ideas about forming ideas about yourself and all of this, but what does that look like then if we're trying to measure where someone is on that spectrum? So there are really four main domains that we are thinking about. That's self-reflectivity, which is the ability to kind of reflect on your own thoughts, experiences, in your life over time. The awareness of other people's mental states. So your ability to reflect on other people's thoughts, emotions, where they've come from, how they got to be who they are, things like that. Decentration, which is the idea that other people lead lives which may intersect with you, but the lives of people often have nothing to do with you, for lack of a better way to put it. That you're not the center of everything, and other people have experiences that are outside of their relationship to you. So basically the ability to situate yourself in the larger social world and understanding that, or perhaps having less of an understanding of that. And then mastery, which is the ability to use this understanding of yourself to cope with some psychological problems that you may encounter. I'm really only going to focus on self-reflectivity just as a example, just for time's sake. But all of these scales are measured by the Metacognitive assessment scale. And so each of these domains is rated. And what we're rating usually is either therapy transcripts, or we ask people to participate in an interview. It's called the IPI. I never remember what it stands for. I think it's in Indiana Psychiatric something interview. And basically people are asked to provide narratives of their lives in a conversation with a research assistant or things like that. And then those narratives are transcribed and are rated, so that we're trying to figure out where people are on this scale when they're recounting narratives of their lives. Are they rich, and are they complex? Are they perhaps quite barren and don't necessarily involve a lot of these more complex ideas that we're talking about? So, and I'm happy to talk more about the other scales if folks have questions. But for the purposes of this is the self-reflectivity scale. And what we're measuring here is going from really significant levels of fragmentation, as we were talking about, to on those higher levels of integration and ability to form those complex understandings. So I don't know if I'll go through every single one, but basically the idea is these lower items, there's just this understanding that there are thoughts in your mind. These thoughts exist in your mind, and these thoughts are your own. They didn't come from anywhere else. There's not a confusion, or there isn't even maybe a thought about where they came from, but you understand you have thoughts in your own mind. 3 and 4 are more focused on, 3 is those cognitive operations. What that means is people are able to identify those cognitive, a thought about a thought, right? These cognitive operations. I thought this. I remember this. I hope for this. I wish for this. Things like that. 4 is feelings or emotions. So the ability to reflect on and say, like, I felt very angry when this happened. I was so excited to learn XYZ, things like that. 5 and 6 are kind of talking a little more about like fallibility of your thoughts and that they're kind of subjective or open to interpretation. Also that, you know, wishes are different from reality. And that not everything is possible, but you may still have these thoughts or these aspirations, and that is separate from what might actually happen. And then 7, 8, and 9 are talking more about your ability to synthesize, as we were saying, or put together the experience of your thoughts and emotions. So 7 is, in the moment, I understand that my thoughts and emotions are connected in the situation that I'm in. 8 is, I'm feeling this way now, and I can remember a time in the past that I felt this way also. And that's consistent across time. And then 9 is really just saying the same thing, but it's a more sophisticated version of that, right? Looking across your life. I'm the kind of person who, I'm the kind of person who may get nervous with public speaking. And I can think of times in the past where like things went, you know, I got really anxious and it affected me in this way. Another time where I felt really confident and things went really well. And that reminded me the next time to be confident because things will go well. Things like that, to have this broader understanding across the flow or kind of the narrative of one's life, who I am as a person. So, well, who cares, right? We have all these measurements and like we can score people on these things, rate people. Why does that matter? Well, the scores on the MASS-A do correlate or predict a number of different closely related concepts, right? Proving its validity. So cognitive insight, as well as specifically insight into illness or awareness of illness. Several domains of social cognition, coping style, and accuracy of self-assessment. In this case, it's work performance. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go into all of the different research evidence for all of these. Happy to send folks. There will be several instances of small type of citations that isn't really helpful for folks, but I'm happy to send citations if folks want to email me or talk further. But these are some of the examples of what proves to us that this is a valid concept that is related to a number of really important other constructs. But then, you know, is this something that's unique to psychosis, right? So we looked at metacognitive ability as assessed by the MASS-A in other groups of folks. So in this case, we're looking at in a schizophrenia group, a substance use group, a PTSD group, and then a group with folks diagnosed with HIV was also included. And the reason for this was we wanted to be looking at people, when we're looking at controls often have not experienced the level of adversity that folks with psychosis or with schizophrenia in this case have. And so the decision for that study in particular that Paul and others decided was that we wanted to compare the capacity of those who have faced a long history of adversity, but for a different reason, for a medical diagnosis, rather than for a mental health concern. And as you can see across these scores, if you remember, higher numbers mean a higher level of metacognitive capacity, that the schizophrenia group is lower across all domains as in comparison to the other 3. So what that tells us is that this is likely a unique feature of psychosis, of psychotic disorders. That doesn't mean folks in other, with other experiences or other challenges can't experience difficulty with metacognition, but research has suggested to us that this is likely to some degree a unique feature of this experience. So then if it's a unique feature of psychosis, well, then does it look differently across time? Right, in folks that are early in their experience of psychosis in a first or early episode versus prolonged. And what we found, at least in this particular study, is that while certain domains might improve, and in particular, this study suggested that awareness of other people and an understanding of other people might improve over time for folks that are a bit older or further into their experience with psychosis, but overall, difficulties with metacognition may be stable features of the disorder and perhaps unique to psychosis, again, in this case, in comparison to folks with substance use issues. So if we think about that, then particularly for the first episode group, if they are even more impaired in their understanding of other people, what are those implications, right, for treatment? Impaired relationships, or ability to connect with others, being able to take other people's views, empathizing, things like that. And if as we know, first episode or that early time period is a very important developmental time for a number of things, including individuation, forming relationships, deciding who you want to be around you. And so if this is the case, this further proves that this is an important treatment target for us, right? So what are some of the other correlates? Again, I don't unfortunately have time to go into a bunch of detail, but there's a lot of research, again, another unhelpful small print list of citations that tells us that metacognitive deficits are related to a number of different other domains. So subjective accounts of recovery, general functioning and functional capacity, social relationships, the ability to form and maintain relationships with others. As we said, insight, forensic history, stigma resistance, reasoning style, all of these things. And again, I can send folks citations if they're curious. It also predicts things in the future. So poor metacognition has been shown to predict future work performance, severity of negative symptoms, intrinsic motivation, which actually one study found that intrinsic motivation may be a mediator for the relationship between poor metacognition and poor overall functioning. And then also capacity for social connectedness. Another unhelpful way to tell you about these studies is these screenshots. This was actually Paul's favorite way to tell people about his studies. He had an encyclopedia-like knowledge of all of his work and was able to kind of rattle off all the results of each study. So this was a good way for him to do it, but I figured I would stick to it for a little bit. But this is one study in particular looking at quality of life and social relationships. This is another looking at correlation with negative symptoms. And then I think importantly for folks here, I wanted to point out a study that also looked at positive and negative symptoms and their relationship with metacognition in first episode psychosis. So this study used a regression to add metacognition scores to already known predictors of negative symptoms. And when they did that, they found that metacognition accounted for a large portion of the variance in the PANSS negative symptoms. Also accounted for some variance in the positive symptoms, although later analyses suggested that it was a stronger relationship between metacognition and negative symptoms. But again, kind of further underlining the idea that this is something that's present early on and is quite a reasonable treatment target for folks to be focusing on. So that's all the research about, why do we care, right? And like, how is metacognition related to a number of different domains? But then what's the treatment look like? And does it work? Can we change people's metacognitive abilities or improve them in some way? So the first studies and many since have been case studies. So the first two citations at the top here are some of Paul's first case studies that he published at this point many years ago. And then the second two are particular cases that are times where folks used merit with first episode psychosis. I really encourage reading these. I understand case studies, can only go so far. And I think they're a really excellent look into what this treatment can look like, what improvement can look like, how difficult this work can be. I'm happy to resend these if folks are wondering. I mean, broadly across, there have been many case studies as other than these. Broadly, we generally do see improvement in folks over time on metacognitive capacity, insight, and symptoms. Often what was noticed is that if we're tracking one person's progress over time, metacognitive capacity often improved first, and then we saw an improvement in symptoms later, suggesting that perhaps that's the kind of sequence of events that needs to happen. We need to have, which perhaps makes logical sense, we need people to have the ability to do that kind of synthesizing of their experiences and their understanding of themselves. And then there becomes, one way to put it is like there's less need for these symptoms. And we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that in a moment. In one case study, they kind of charted what it looks like over time. And that means what metacognition capacity looks like. And at the same time, the delusional content of each session. And if you can kind of see, there's this inverse relationship over time that if in a particular session, if someone was displaying a greater ability to reflect metacognitively and, make these complex conclusions and things like that, there was a lower level of delusional content. And then conversely, when their delusional content was greater, their ability to do that, to reflect, was lower. So again, this idea that perhaps, psychosis is a means by which people are explaining their experiences when it's too difficult to do so, or when people aren't having the metacognitive capacity to be able to make these judgments about the world. So then treatment studies, which are using merit, which I'm burying the lead. We'll get there in a moment. But there have been a few fairly small, but good studies looking at the effectiveness of merit. So now at this point, 10 years ago, there was a pilot study looking just at the effectiveness of it. We saw improvements in that study in subjective recovery, as well as in that domain of self-reflectivity that we were talking about earlier. And then looking at kind of case study level evidence in that pilot study did suggest some improvements in some folks in symptom severity. Then there was a small open trial in 2015 comparing merit to supportive psychotherapy. And all participants did demonstrate some improvement. However, notably in the merit group, participants demonstrated a better ability to integrate their experiences, as we're talking about, into that larger narrative, higher levels of that self-reflectivity, increased agency, and also increased ability to understand and manage distress, pain, things like that, which is that mastery domain that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And then there have been a couple of other studies. There was another pilot that was in preparation for the RCT. That's the third entry there. The pilot session really shortened merit into just 12 sessions. The format was determined to be acceptable. There was a pattern of improvement, although there weren't any significant effects. And then there was a small RCT done with first episode psychosis, which I'll highlight a little bit more in a second, but they did demonstrate improvement in insight, interestingly, or importantly, there. And then there was a small RCT done a few years ago comparing marriage treatment as usual. Metacognition did improve in both groups. However, those improvements lasted longer in the merit group. The treatment as usual group kind of returned right back to baseline after the treatment was over. And then there were some specific improvements for the merit group on self-reflectivity and the mastery scales as well. As I was saying, this particular small pilot study was done to see if merit is a reasonable intervention for folks with early psychosis. Right? Is it feasible? Is it acceptable? Because most of the studies had been done with folks that were more in chronic stages of illness. And we found, or they found, I didn't do it, they found that it was feasible and acceptable. And also, importantly, the study did target insight, and so was looking at that in particular, but insight did improve. This graph shows the PANS insight score. I always have to remind myself PANS scores lower means better. But as you can see, pre and post, the merit group did show an improvement in insight in particular, whereas the treatment as usual group continued to have worse insight. So, okay, well then what the heck is this treatment, right? I've told you why metacognition matters and is a treatment target. I've told you some evidence of how it can improve with treatment. Well, what is the treatment? Well, first I want to point out some other pitfalls or difficulties that we can encounter when we're thinking about psychosocial treatment for folks with psychosis, or some general stigmatizing attitudes that exist globally, broadly, but can be true in thinking about treatment in particular, right? So there can be this more general paternalistic or infantilizing attitudes towards folks. There can be skepticism about what recovery might look like or what recovery might mean. Sometimes there's a concern about level of incompetence and being able to attend to activities of daily living. And so if that's, people are having trouble with that, how might they, participate in therapy? Sometimes there's beliefs that folks are prone to violence or erratic behavior. When it comes to treatment in particular, there are sometimes attitudes about psychotherapy, as in, are people with psychosis able to participate in psychotherapy, right? And if they are, then it must be very skill-based, because if you recall, a collection of skill deficits, right? So we should be skill-based only, or should only be manual-based, or should only be time-limited, and that we really have to just focus on symptom reduction. In terms of medication, there can often be, a lack of shared decision-making, sometimes polypharmacy. Also important to consider what it means to have, serious mental illness or psychosis, and also be part of other marginalized communities or identities, because that is only compounding all of the things that we're pointing out here. And I think importantly, a lot of times when people with psychosis are saying things that are perhaps hard to understand or hard to make sense of, the belief is like, well, there is no making sense of it, that we kind of put it in a bucket of, this is a symptom, and I'm going to put it over here, and we're going to talk about how we can get rid of these symptoms. But then there's not necessarily further thought about what it might mean, what that symptom or what that person is telling you might mean. We might have this tendency to kind of shut our brains off to that a little bit, because it's hard, right? It takes a lot of thought. You may not succeed in understanding, but that there's this feeling of, oh, there's no making sense of that. I know that that's a symptom that we have to kind of work on getting rid of, which Merritt would argue is very untrue. So then Merritt, metacognitive reflection and insight therapy. The premise, which I'll just read to you, is helping people with SMI or psychosis to develop more complex understandings of themselves and others, will enable them to better manage their lives and achieve their personal goals and aspirations, which I hope in our, my rambling thus far has perhaps led you to that understanding, right? It's that like metacognitive capacity, metacognition is so essential to our ability to kind of exist in life, that focusing on that will have these downstream effects of helping people manage their lives and do what they want to be doing. Some assumptions, which I think we've touched on, but just to keep in mind as we're thinking about it, is that metacognition has multiple areas that we're thinking about. It's an essential activity. It is intersubjective. It is a capacity, meaning it can change, and deficits, as we said, can result from a number of different factors. Merit, as I said, is a framework, so it's flexible in terms of its delivery and its technique. It is not manualized in any way, but its focus remains on improving metacognition, based in the assumption that this, as I said, will drive improvements in other areas. So some preconditions, and when we say preconditions means, for lack of a better way to put it, what therapists that are using Merit have to be on board with, so to speak, right? So the first one is the client can recover. Yes. And importantly, and right after that is, the client is the only person who can direct his or her or their path to recovery, right? And I point that out because when we think about, as perhaps clinicians, what recovery means, we have ideas about what that means. Someone who, completed 3 semesters of school and then dropped out, perhaps in our minds, we might say, oh man, well, how I know that person would really be back on track and would be really recovered as they get back to school and they keep working on their degree. That might be your thought. And the person may agree with you. The person may not. And so the point is to be able to keep in mind constantly, what is your idea about someone's path to recovery, and what is the person who you're talking to's understanding of that, and really being willing to, as number 3 says, participate in non-hierarchical conversations that support recovery. And what I mean by that is, often we take stances, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a bit, where we're the expert, as a clinician, we're the expert and we're here to kind of pass along knowledge. We have skills or things that we think will help folks and we want to pass that along, but it is this kind of hierarchical conversation. I say many times to trainees and other times that I'm talking about Merit is that you are 2 people in a room talking mostly about perhaps one person's life, but you are two people in a room talking, and that it is not this hierarchical relationship, because then if there's that hierarchy, there's that understanding, for example, of, well, I know what recovery looks like, and so we have to work towards that. As we touched on a little bit, the idea that there is this kind of disorganized or unusual material that people may be expressing can feel, confusing or hard to understand. The command hallucinations, paranoia, ideas of reference, all these, terms that we often use, it can feel uncomfortable also, right, to sit with those things. And that's why a lot of times I find that people might, kind of just shut their brains down a little bit, or again, put that in the bucket of symptoms, rather than thinking hard and thinking together about what that material might mean. And Merritt suggests or asserts, that's what I'm looking for, is that this material can be understood. Again, you may not always be successful in it, you may not understand everything, but it can be understood. And part of what Merritt advocates for is that you are comfortable talking about anything, right? Because symptoms, this material, these experiences are potential gateways to the core concerns of what a person is dealing with, right? And so to understand those is to better understand the person you're talking to. And then by exploring them, symptoms, again, these experiences can often respond with decreased intensity, because again, there's less of a need for these symptoms if we are forming this more complex understanding of, who we are and how we got to where we are. Also, though, enhanced ability to reflect on these things in your life and all of this can result in more pain, right? And we see this in other areas. We tell people sometimes, I know in trauma work sometimes, or in other areas, it gets worse before it gets better, that kind of thing. It applies here in that if someone has been, the example I often give is someone is very estranged from their family. And their explanation or understanding of that is that, their family is actually quite jealous of them because they have a special relationship with a celebrity. And so the family has distanced themselves from this person, and that's the understanding. However, perhaps we continue to talk, we continue to find out illicit narratives about family interactions, relationships, what's happened over time. And we might come to an understanding of, well, actually, your relationship with your family, you became estranged because things were really difficult. Like perhaps you treated your family poorly, I don't know, mean to them, stole from them, I don't know what it is. Or your family was mean to you, stole from you, whatever it is. And these relationships were estranged for those reasons. That becomes a more tangible understanding of what happened, but that's also quite a painful thing to come to terms with, right? So I also encourage folks to not see this as we're trying to fix things. We're trying to help people come to this understanding that may end up in a painful realization, but that's the purpose, more so than trying to, again, fix or get rid of symptoms or things like that. And then finally, stigma. Present all the time in everyone, in the client's mind, in your mind, a society's mind, obviously. And so we must continually assess that as the clinician in this case. We're continually thinking about why might we be reacting to the thing the person is saying or the thing the person has done? Why might the person with these experiences be reacting in a particular way? Does that have anything to do with like internalized stigma? Things like that. So always on everyone's mind. So these are the 8 major elements of Merritt sessions, and I'm going to go through, I think we're doing okay on time? Yeah, I'm going to go through each of them in a little more detail. But the idea is that these are present in every session. So that rather than Merritt being a sequential sort of, at session 2, we do this exercise, at session 4, you do this homework, et cetera, et cetera. These elements are present in every session. And that these can be measurable processes in terms of how it's going. I've often described to folks as if you were to able to be a fly on the wall in a Merritt session and just observe, from the outside, it would appear to be quite unstructured. And yes, it appears that way. And in the mind of the therapist, it is in fact quite structured, because the goal or the job of the therapist is to be keeping track of all of these elements as you're talking. and constantly thinking of connections that you're making in your mind about what this person is saying, changing how you're framing things for people based on how you're understanding where they are metacognitively. We talk about at what level we're intervening, which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute. But basically, if someone is quite low, for example, metacognitively in that session, to ask them to kind of use some sort of broad reflection about their life over time, as we're remembering in that higher level of the self-reflectivity scale, it's not gonna land, right? So we're wanting to kind of keep in mind where people are and noticing progress as well, and kind of shifting as we go along. So there's a lot to keep track of, but again, if you're just watching a session, it would appear to be pretty unstructured. Some common features across all social treatments that are true here as well. We approach this work with warmth, with respect, with engendering trust as much as we can, trying to find common goals with folks. Curiosity is so critical, what we were talking about in terms of this material that sometimes is hard to understand. You're approaching it with curiosity. Tell me more about that. I'm trying to make sense of it in my mind, but so help me understand, what is it? How did this happen? What led to this, et cetera? There's an ongoing dialogue, right? Back and forth. It's the two people in the room talking about this person's experience. And then also freedom from jargon, right? When we're trying to not use a lot of clinical terms, or, if there's no real need to talk about diagnosis more than is necessary, we're not using that either, right? We're talking about a person's experience of themselves and their lives. But as we said, then some unique features of merit that perhaps aren't true of all psychotherapy is we're constantly assessing the person's ability to do this integration, right, of themselves, of other people. And as I was describing, we're guiding how we're intervening to match that person's metacognitive abilities. So like I said, intervening at a particular level based on how you've understood them to be on those scales currently. So the first element then is the client's agenda. And in this case, we mean agenda, not a list of items to talk about, but the agenda as in the motivation or the purpose behind why people are saying the things we're saying. The goal in doing this is that people are understanding more clearly their own agenda, their own purpose in what they say and what they do. And so there's a constant check-in. Sometimes I've thought about it, or the phrase that always comes to mind is like throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks, in terms of trying to sort out what a person's agenda might be. So for example, someone could come in and, there's often focus on really the first thing someone is saying when they sit down to talk to you. And it might be, I took all of my medication last week. Great. There could be a number of different agendas that are behind that statement, right? It could be, I want you, you're the doctor, I'm the patient, and I want to report to you all the things that I did right. It could be, please think of me as a good patient, or a great patient, the best one, because I've done the things that you've asked. It could be, I want to start off talking about something good because we ended last time talking about something really painful. We're talking about my relationship with my brother, and how I may have, screwed him over and all of that sort of thing. And I don't want anything to do with that. So we're starting here so that, you're not going to go back to that. It could be, a complex agenda. It could be quite basic. It could be something as simple as someone comes in and says, man, it's really hot in here. It could be a simple request just to turn down the heat. However, it could be a suggestion that that person's feeling really uncomfortable, or anxious, or a request that, you should be the one to be a caretaker in this instance. Like, I should attend to your needs and do something about this. The goal always is to just think out loud, to think with this person about it. You might get it wrong. We'll often get it wrong, by thinking. And so impeded by, you're taking these comments at face value and you ignore any sort of subtleties. Now, of course, we can go too far in the opposite direction where, micro analyzing every single thing. Well, that's not helpful either. But what we want to be doing is thinking about why people are saying the things they're saying, so that you're then sharing it. Like, well, when you say that, I wonder if I'm supposed to just kind of tell you that you did a great job and we shouldn't really think too closely about anything else, or that I shouldn't ask you about anything else that's going on. And that's an opportunity then for the person to hear that and say either, yeah, you're right, or no, that wasn't my intention. What I actually was thinking about was this. Because that process is that person hearing how you understood the thing they said, which in itself sometimes, as we were talking about with that awareness of the other scale, something that's difficult to do or doesn't happen very much is like thinking about what someone else might think. And it also helps that person reflect on, what did I mean when I said that? What was I trying to get at, right? And that's something that can be quite difficult and hard to do, but is very important to continually do throughout the session, to make it manifest what it is that the person's, wishes, desires are, motivations behind saying what they're saying. So then inserting your mind, element 2. So in this case, you're sharing, sounds basic, but you're sharing what's in your mind, and what happens in your mind when this person is saying the things that they're saying. And so the goal is that clients are going to develop a greater awareness of how, we're reacting, how the therapist is reacting, things like that. And it's really a joint reflection on what's happening in the room. This can also sometimes involve a little bit of self-disclosure. Examples of that, and people often bristle at that idea, and I'm not telling people to share their life story, but something like a client might have described a time where they ended up feeling really embarrassed because they forgot to do something, and the people they were in front of, they felt embarrassed. But then they said this happened. You ask them how they felt about it, and they say, I don't know, I didn't care. But you have a sense perhaps that this is an important narrative based on perhaps other information you have. So then that might come, and again, these have to be genuine. You're not making things up. But in that instance, I might then, in my own mind, it might come, a memory might come back to me about a time where I, forgot the words in a school play. And I was up on stage and I just completely blanked. People kind of chuckled and I just felt so embarrassed. And so in that case, you're kind of sharing that story with the purpose of saying like, well, you said this, it brought this to mind for me, and this is how I felt. I wonder, was that true for you? Was it actually different? You really didn't care what other people thought? Things like that. I think sometimes people have trouble with this, particularly if you're taking these stances that are more hierarchical, education-based, teacher-student. Perhaps you feel fearful of doing that sort of thing, of kind of being more open, or you're timid, you're worried. There's a great paper that one of our colleagues, Jay Ham and others, wrote about 4 particular stances that people take in therapy. They have interesting names for them: the arbiter of reality, the ambassador of health, the minister of comfort, and the spokesperson. But the idea is that we all, as in my opinion, as therapists, perhaps are taking on one or more of those at times in session. So arbiter of reality, someone who is trying to point out the reasons why what someone is saying isn't true. It's like, well, no, actually, here's all the evidence why, so don't worry about that sort of thing. Or let's really just get back to what we know to be true, that sort of thing. Minister of comfort, someone that's really just there to provide comfort, but not really interested in doing any sort of like serious reflection or sitting with any sort of pain. You're just trying to like find reasons why things aren't as bad as they seem, things like that. But if you're aware of that, that's another thing that you're constantly doing in the session, is trying to be aware of why might I say that thing? Well, let me shift my approach a little bit. Let me share this other thing that came to my mind as we were talking, so that the client also knows what's happening in my mind as we're talking. Element 3 is taking a narrative focus. So it's really attending to and reflecting with clients about the sense of themselves. And how we do that is we're eliciting narratives from people. And what I mean by that is like a client might say some sort of abstract thing, like some sort of personality trait, like, oh yeah, I'm a person that's gets easily irritated when I'm inconvenienced. It's a very general statement. Like, what does that really mean? So to elicit a narrative about that. Tell me about the worst time you remember of that, or tell me about a time you thought you were going to be irritated and you weren't, whatever it is. But what we want is to elicit these stories, these narratives about a time in someone's life. They can be really seemingly trivial. But I've been known to ask a lot of really seemingly unimportant questions, right? Like, wow, okay, your 6th birthday, no one showed up. Oh my gosh, that must have been so. Tell me everything. So you woke up in the morning and what was it like? And you put on what kind of clothes? 6 is maybe a little young for all these questions, but a 10th birthday. We went downstairs. What happened next? Did you get a phone call? All of these things. Because with lower metacognitive capacity, we get a lot more barren narratives. In that interview that I was talking about that we rate, people with lower capacity don't have a lot of detail to share. I don't know, I woke up, I went, I got ready for the party, no one came, and then I went to sleep. But we're wanting to elicit more details, both for our understanding of a person, to be able to form a picture in our minds of who this person is, how they got to where they are, all of these things we've been saying. And then also for the person to be able to reflect more on this. And over time, you might talk about the same narrative episode, and you might get more and more detail over time because there's more memories, there's more ability to reflect on those things. And so you're both providing a space for the person to build out these narratives and have a better understanding of, like, you're right, I guess. Like, there have been a few times that, I don't know, whatever it is, like I have been embarrassed in front of other people. And so that you can start to have this more complete and longer understanding of how you got to where you are. And then also for the therapist to have a better understanding of who this person is, what their experiences have been that have led them to where they are. Element 4 is the psychological problem. And when we say psychological problem, we don't mean I hear voices. That's a symptom, right? Or I want to go back to school. I haven't gone back to school. That in itself is not a psychological problem. The goal is that folks are going to be identifying, as we've been talking about, this greater awareness of themselves when you are confronted with particular challenges, distress, dilemmas. And so helping then thinking together to identify what is this actual psychological problem. So an example might be, I hear voices and that makes it hard to socialize, and so I feel isolated. That is a more nuanced understanding of what someone's dealing with, and then may lead to a conversation about how do I want to address that, right? So, we're identifying these struggles using common understandable language, not clinical jargon, as we said. But if we're too focused on perhaps what we think are the problems going on, preconceived problems, or if it's quite, kind of non-specific or symptom-focused language and we kind of stop there, then we're not working towards this more in-depth understanding of what someone is facing, and then which can lead to, as we've been saying, or I've been saying, how you want to address that. Element 5 is reflecting on the therapeutic relationship. So attending to the client's idea of what our relationship is like. And overall, the goal is to develop a greater awareness of that, right? Because if we're thinking about those 4 elements again, this is kind of an opportunity, a microcosm to have this kind of really in-depth relationship with another person and understand how that person perceives me, how I perceive that person, how we interact together, things like that. And so, providing opportunities to think about that, to kind of reflect on it. The most basic of them is at the end of every merit session saying, so how do you think things went today? And having, leaving more than 2 seconds for that question, hopefully, although it doesn't always work out. But having the ability to reflect on that. And perhaps the client says, like, I felt like you weren't really listening today, or I felt like you were judging all of the things I said today. Those are pretty high level reflections, but like that's the hope, right? That's the purpose. This can be impeded by therapists not trying to do this, or not not leaving the space for it, or not devoting enough space in your mind to think about how you're experienced by a client. And that can be a scary thing, right? In a perhaps similar vein of self-disclosure. being more open about this sort of thing and understanding how someone might be perceiving you as just, again, another person in a room, ideally not the expert who's almost infallible and you know, has these things to pass along to you, but more so just another person who could be making mistakes and could be saying things that aren't good or aren't helpful or are judgmental, stigmatized, things like that. But being willing to have those conversations constantly also to make sure that this continues to be an element of the work. Element 6 is perception of change. So noticing how people are, or helping people to notice, but you also noticing, you know, how things are going along within a session and also across time. And this doesn't mean that there's some expectation of some particular kind of progress, right? And impeded by, as it says here, perhaps therapists are assuming what progress has or has not been accomplished. And that's, again, coming back to that idea of like, we have a sense of what recovery looks like, or we have a sense of what progress looks like. But more so making sure to be asking the client, like how, again, this comes back to that question at the end of session, how did this go? What do you think? And this also is relevant to where people are metacognitively. It can be hard to reflect over time, you know, like, well, where do you think you've come from our first session to now? Sometimes that's difficult, but to the extent that you're able, being able to help people reflect on that and how this work has or has not affected the client and what perhaps they would like to change moving forward. Element 7 refers to those first two metacognitive elements, so self and other. So as I was describing, we're tailoring our interventions or we're intervening at a particular level. If we're not paying attention to that, then we may be intervening. What often happens is what we call our intervening too high. And as that example I gave about, like, you're asking someone to make a connection across, you know, multiple times in their lives, and really like have this complex understanding of who they are. You're offering that as like, well, what I'm seeing is blah, blah, blah. Someone who's at a lower metacognitive level, that may be very hard to understand or to really like wrap your mind around. And so you're constantly trying to figure out where people are and how that should influence the kinds of things you're saying. So for example, with like the self-reflectivity scale, when we were talking about that S3 or S4, that S3 is the cognitive operations. So you have a feeling someone is at that level, the reflections you're making, they may be quite basic, but they're using those cognitive words. So you thought in that moment that, you know, someone was trying to harm you, or you remember from before that, you know, this was a stressful thing for you and you decided another cognitive operation to not do that. You're making sure to use those words, emotions. Then if that's not intervening too high, you might talk about, well, so it sounds like you felt really mad in that instance, or you were outraged about this sort of thing, whatever it is. But if you're not doing that, or if you're assuming that it's the same session to session, then we're not intervening appropriately. If you remember that graph of the session to session, you know, delusions and metacognition, there's another graph I didn't share, but it's, you know, this metacognitive growth is quite nonlinear. People, you know, may start at a particular point. They may improve for some period of time. They may, you know, go back down several levels for some period of time as well. And so having one particular perception of a person and where they are metacognitively and just kind of going with that. And then every time you see them, you're assuming that things are the same. And then element 8 is mastery. So as we were talking about, how can we use someone's metacognitive abilities or help someone use their metacognitive abilities to respond to these challenges? And the challenges we're talking about is that psychological problem. So again, not I hear voices, but I'm isolated because I hear voices and I withdraw from other people. So the higher levels on that mastery scale you're able to use more information about what I know about myself to address those challenges. And at lower levels, you know, for example, I'm thinking of, I think M2 or 3 it is, I haven't looked at that scale in a while, is I just avoid, right? Avoidance. So like if I encounter a challenge, I withdraw. I, you know, stop talking to people. I, you know, cancel things I have to do. As opposed to, you know, higher levels are understanding, you know, well, I remember a time where I did this and I avoided it and it didn't work. It actually made me feel worse. And so I'm going to take that knowledge and I'm going to say, okay, now in this moment, maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll try to do something else. But it's that knowledge of myself and my ability to connect these things from different points in my life to say, okay, well, how do I want to address this challenge that's in front of me now? So those are the elements. A couple of other key points, and then we're kind of getting towards the end, so happy to answer questions or end early. But a couple of key points, as I said before, this isn't a lesson plan. This is not a sequential sequence, it's repetitive, curriculum of, at session 2, we do this exercise. At session 4, we have this homework assignment, things like that. It is not that. It is a framework, as I said before, that you can use coming from a number of different perspectives. You can take these elements and these principles and apply them in your conversations with people, even as you're perhaps doing some other more specific intervention. The elements are synergistic with each other and they're closely related, right? The expectation is that they're all occurring in each session. What's also important to remember is that these elements are not a substitute, as it says here, like a substitute for reflection or emotional engagement. What I mean by that is sitting with someone who has a great deal of psychological pain and a lot of really significant things that have happened that have resulted in this degree of fragmentation, where they're experiencing psychosis, they're having these experiences that are confusing, hard to understand. If you're, as Paul has phrased before, which sounds a little harsh, but if you're not also feeling confused and inadequate at some point with sitting with someone who has, kind of a profound psychotic disorder, you're not likely present enough in the moment. And these elements, they don't, they're not thinking for you. They're not shielding you from how difficult this work can be. As I was saying about like the agenda, for example, the person that you're talking to may also have no idea what their agenda is. And so for you to kind of continue to throw it out, like, maybe, did you mean this? How about this? And then we're not sure. That feels, like, oh man, what are we doing? Or hearing, helping people come to the conclusion that, all of these scary experiences they've been having, it may have some relationship to this really painful thing that happened a long time ago. And to not, try to fend off the urge to find reasons why it's not that bad, or immediately jump to, well, why don't we work on this coping skill that can help you with that? But to really sit with someone, sit with that pain and that feeling of confusion and be present and to help think through it and be willing to just be. That is very hard. And so again, as Paul has said, if you're not feeling that way, chances are you're not perhaps putting, for lack of a better way to put it, putting yourself out there enough. And it is, metacognition, as we've talked about, is measurable and connected to this very conceptual model that's designed to treat this core dysfunction. And as I hope I've beaten you over the head with now, metacognition is this essential activity. And when we have this difficulty or this loss of ability with this essential activity, it has repercussions broadly. And so it makes sense that this is a treatment target that we are then working on so as to help people move forward in their lives. Basically Merit focuses on helping folks, and this is perhaps repetitive, but to just really kind of tie it together, synthesize a fragmented set of memories and experiences into, hopefully, more complex representations of themselves, how they understand themselves and other people, and then using that to choose what you want to do, pursue what you would like to pursue, more, different life choices, move towards more, the phrase that has been used is like psychological reconstruction and responsibility. And that can look a lot of different ways. Again, remembering it's not up to us what we think is right, but to helping the person to decide what they would like to do. A skill building and a more like kind of discrete or concrete or whatever approach to intervention can certainly help people. It's, again, perhaps not complete. And Merit really seeks to understand and address the processes that are needed perhaps to know why I'm going to do a skill or why I want to use this coping strategy, things like that. Because stopping there isn't, again, kind of addressing the broader person. So I think that's all. Just reminding you again of this book, if you're curious about it. For people that know me, I'm happy to lend a copy. And these are a couple of other resources. This is the Merit Institute's website, which has a lot of resources, videos that Paul made. The YouTube channel, don't ask me why it has an @ sign in it. I didn't create it. But it has a number of videos. We have quarterly Merit Institute presentations where folks are presenting on particular areas of their work. And we record those, and they're on the YouTube channel as well. This work is done in concert with so many other people. Paul had so many collaborators across so many continents and countries, and all who are continuing to do this work since we lost him in the summer. So just a smattering of folks here that have done this work for a very long time. So yeah, thank you. And I'm happy we have a good chunk of time for questions. So happy to answer anything that folks are curious about.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Definitely, please, if folks have questions, add them in the chat. I had one to start us off, but just, in thinking about it strikes me, what you're saying about using these elements just in the normal course of, other interventions that you might be using, or kind of drawing from this, even if you're not doing like a full merit session, which, I think is definitely a helpful thing. But I was thinking, and you covered this a little bit, but like, are there flags that you might pick up on, or like things that somebody might say that would kind of alert you to like, maybe we need to start working on metacognition, or like, let's try doing some of this stuff?
Yeah, good question. I guess my knee-jerk response to your answer was like, we can use it with everyone. Like there doesn't need to be a sign, but I mean, I think in some respects, another thought that's, coming to my mind is that perhaps when you're feeling, if you've already tried, for example, some other interventions and they're feeling like they're not landing, because of perhaps material that someone has in their minds that is feeling confusing or takes up a lot of space, at least starting to think about, well, where is this person metacognitively? How have I been talking with them? Like, am I, as I was saying before, like intervening too high? Am I using these kinds of reflections that are perhaps not really landing very well? And can I shift some of my the way I ask questions and speak? Another part of it is that another example is if someone comes to I'm thinking of a trainee who has a new client who said, basically, I'm here because my mom made me. I don't really know what we're going to do. In that sense, which I advocate for everyone anyway, but in that particular example, narratives. Tell me about your life. Literally tell me anything. Whatever we want to talk about, because if what that's doing is still building a picture in my mind of who you are, how you got to where you are. And for the person, in this case, a person with significant psychosis, it also gives them the opportunity to start to tell. So in addition to just basic benefits of like rapport building, but, starting to listen to those narratives and start to like suggest to this person, like, well, okay, you told me that, you don't want to be here. There's nothing to talk about. So maybe you want to tell me that I'm useless, like that, I could basically be a blank wall, and like, who cares about that? Like, wow, what are we gonna, how are we gonna go from there? Also using the agenda to try to figure out what's going on. So I think these things are useful no matter what. But those are, I guess, a couple of examples that come to mind.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you. One question that we have in the chat: has there been any efforts to do this in a group setting?
Yes, actually, small, but yes, at a VA in a place that I'm forgetting, West Haven, maybe. They put together a manual, and I think did a little bit of publishing on their experiences with it. I am not recalling the results of it. I think these concepts can be used, at any point. How it gets more formalized into some sort of group treatment, I think, remains or there's still work to be done on that. But I certainly think that was a useful area to explore, for sure.
Great. And then another question that we have, so how do you reconcile the anti-hierarchical therapeutic stance with the presentation of some people being, quote, more advanced in their metacognitive ability? I say, especially since I'm guessing that most clinicians are going to be, quote, better at metacognition than most clients with severe mental illness.
I mean, maybe that's true, not always true. I certainly have had the experience that that's not true. I guess the question is then, I mean, I guess I'm not sure of what we're asking, because I think you can be non-hierarchical in any situation, right? So I wonder if maybe the concern is that if someone is more advanced, that they have more expectations of you. And so they're expecting you to be an expert of some sort, and that they've come to you for expert advice. I think I would reflect on that I would absolutely kind of put that out there and say, okay, so my job is really to be like the textbook for you, to kind of tell you what to do next and things like that. I don't see any reason why you can't continue to take the stance of we're two people in a room thinking together, that it can look a lot different, as we were seeing, these levels are all different, and you're doing all of those interventions at whatever level people are at in a non-hierarchical way. So I think it can work across all sorts of situations.
So yeah, conceptualizing it less as a skill that you're teaching them, and more as an area that you're exploring kind of mutually.
Yes. Yeah. I got another question that may have been sent to just me, but I'll read it. Can you speak about how to incorporate issues of structural incorporate issues of structural or environmental factors in the metacognitive efforts? For example, maybe accounting for the role of discrimination in identifying their social withdrawal behavior. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is another benefit of, I guess it was a way to phrase it, or feature of eliciting narratives from people, right? Because you're trying to have an understanding of what people's experiences are, and how they've, decided to do the things they do or not do the things they do. And that may include experiences of discrimination, of racism, of, whatever that might be, that has led to that as well. And so being able to reflect on that and say, wow, you hear a narrative, and then you'd be able to reflect and say, I would too. I would also choose to withdraw from, relationships. Do you think that that's had, what about more recently? There are ways to pull that in. And again, that can be a focus of your narrative without, being too, is it prescribed in terms of how you're asking it, right? You don't want to be saying, well, because you're a person of this particular, marginalized group, I might imagine you have these experiences, but instead listening for it and then highlighting it, and kind of, again, just going with what the client is describing to you in terms of their experience, and then reflecting how you think that may have played a role, and seeing what they have to say.
Great. Yeah, great questions, everybody. That's really good. Yeah, anything else folks want to ask before we close out for today? I'll give our normal MHTTC shout out that we will be sending out slides and recordings. So folks can email. You should have gotten an email when you registered for the event. So there's information if you have questions to reach out to there. And I believe Lola had pasted the post-event survey in the chat as well, so folks can fill that out too. But so yeah, last call for any questions. Okay. Otherwise, yeah, thank you so much, Emily. This has been what Burkel's saying, wonderful presentation. I really appreciate hearing more about it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for everyone for joining. It was great to share it with you all.
Great. Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.